So welcome this evening. I'm Meredith Malone. I'm curator at the Mildred Lane Kemper Art Museum at Washington University in St. Louis. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight Lydia McKelvie, Alice Nguyen, and Hannah Ward, the three outstanding student curators behind the exhibition Women's Work, now on view at the Kemper's Teaching Gallery. The exhibition opened last Friday, and it will be open through August 1st of this summer. While the museum is not currently open to the general public, I'm thrilled that we can share the exhibition here virtually, and I'm excited to discuss it in more depth with the three curators this evening. Women's Work is the culmination of the 2020-21 Arthur Greenberg Undergraduate Curatorial Fellowship, an ongoing initiative made possible through the generosity of James Cohen and named in memory of Arthur Greenberg. As undergraduate students, these two art history majors curated an exhibition in what was then the Washington University Gallery of Art, an experience that launched both of them into career-long engagement in the visual arts. The fellowship is jointly sponsored by the Mildred Lane Kemper Art Museum and Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts, and the Department of Art History and Archaeology in Arts and Sciences. It's a competitive program that offers outstanding undergraduate students in art history and related disciplines the opportunity to curate an exhibition in the museum's teaching gallery. Dr. Isla Sharon, Associate Professor in the Department of Art History and Archaeology, who's also joining us tonight, served as the faculty advisor to the students, guiding them through an independent study in the fall of 2021, resulting in the essay published in the exhibition's brochure. The students also completed an internship at the Kemper in the summer of 2020, where they researched art objects, compiled a checklist, and worked closely with our Associate Registrar, Kim Broker, and myself on several loan requests.
Hi all, I'm Isla Sharon, and we want to congratulate this year's curatorial team, Lydia, Alice, and Hannah, who are all art history majors. Their ambitious project considers visual representations of women as laborers in the home, the field, the factory, and the societal norms that prescribed these roles throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Rather than an exhaustive survey of the representation of women's labor in modern and contemporary art, the exhibition unfolds in three thematic sections that explore agency, equity, and performance. Over half the works in the exhibition come from the Kemper's permanent collection and include prints, drawings, photographs, sculpture, and videos. The emergence of 19th and 20th century feminist movements, primarily in the United States and Britain, but also in France, provides the political framework within which many of the works in this exhibition were created. Meredith and I would also like to acknowledge the constraints that the pandemic has placed on the student curators this year. The Greenberg Fellowship is typically a hands-on experience, one in which students spend a significant portion of time at the Kemper Art Museum as part of the summer internship. For this iteration of the fellowship, all work was done remotely to comply with social distancing guidelines. In addition, the students had limited access to library resources and unexpected restrictions on the artworks they could request from partner institutions. This exhibition is a testament to the students' focus, enthusiasm, and ability to collaborate virtually during ever-changing circumstances. We are so pleased to celebrate the success of their efforts, and we congratulate them on a great accomplishment. We are very grateful to Elizabeth Childs, Etta and Mark Steinberg Professor of Art History and Chair of the Department of Art History and Archaeology, and Sabine Ekman, William T. Kemper Director and Chief Curator, Kemper Art Museum, for their dedication to this project and recognition of its educational value. Our sincere thanks also go to our colleagues at the D.B. Dowd Modern Graphic History Library, Washington University Libraries, Julian Edison Department of Special Collections, Krannert Art Museum, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, the Missouri Historical Society, St. Louis Art Museum, and David and Alfred Smart Museum of Art, University of Chicago, for their generosity in lending their artworks and trusting and supporting these first-time curators.
We'd also like to thank the museum staff, in particular Kim Broker, our Associate Registrar for Collections. We also extend gratitude to Jane Neidhart, our Head of Publications, and to Holly Tasker, our Production Editor, for their incredible investment and guidance for the students toward their successful implementation of this really impressive exhibition brochure. Last but not least, we'd like to acknowledge the leadership of Carmen Colangelo, the Ralph J. Nagel Dean of the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts, Feng-Sheng Hu, Dean, and Barbara Schall, former Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and Jennifer Smith, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. Before we hand things over to the students, we want to encourage you all to participate by asking questions using the Q&A feature in the Zoom. But please be aware that we are recording this event tonight, and we will post the event in the coming days on the museum's YouTube channel. So your questions will be recorded as well. We'll answer as many questions as we can in the second half of the program. So I'd like to say another hearty congratulations to the students, and it's your turn.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Lydia McKelvie. I'm one of the student curators for this exhibition, and I'm going to be covering the agency section. So this is a photo of the brochure and of us holding the brochure on the opening day. Here's an installation view of the entire gallery. So you can see you have from left to right on your screen the agency section, the equity section, and the performance section. So this is just, since we're not able to be in person, you can get a sense of what it looks like in person. So first, I'm going to be talking about the agency section. Each section of the exhibition builds on the one prior to it. So this section is more foundational and establishes traditional modes of feminized labor and how that interacts with women's agency in their lives and their work. By traditional modes of feminized labor, I mean labor that is socially prescribed to women to perform. So the first pairing we're going to be looking at is regarding textile work. There we go. So we have this pairing. They're next to each other in the gallery. It's Child Hassan's Mod Sewing, 1883, which is a watercolor and graphite from the St. Louis Art Museum. And then we have Malay's Woman Carding Wool from 1855 to 1856, which is an etching from the Kemper Museum's collection. So textile labor is a feminized form of labor that has been socially prescribed to women for millennia. And that is certainly true within the 19th century social context. And women of all classes participated in textile work of some variety. So we want to explore that a little bit with this pairing. First, we have Mod Sewing. That is depicting Child Hassan's wife that he has just recently married is the one who is depicted in this portrait. So this is a newlywed young woman. And you can see that she is in a domestic space. She's lounging back. She is engaged in embroidery, not too actively engaged. She seems pretty relaxed while she's doing it. Embroidery was an essential part of young women's education in this time period, especially women of the upper middle class. It was considered an ornamental skill along with music performance and the acquisition of foreign languages. For the other image on the screen, Woman Carding Wool, we see a very different type of labor being performed. This is a more strenuous labor. So this woman she is of a different social standing. She is a rural working class woman who is participating in outwork. Outwork was a part of a cottage industry as it's been defined, where women would collect materials for raw textile production, bring it into their homes, and process it in their homes. The reason that they did this is so that they could also watch their children and take care of their other household duties while they were performing this labor for additional pay for their household. So these two pairings, this pairings in particular, they're two very different women of very different circumstances, but there is remarkable resemblance in their depiction when you think about the viewer's gaze and how the viewer is engaging with these women. We are looking at them, but they are not looking back at us. For Mod Sewing, she's gazing off into the distance. It provides a very nice view of her face, as you can see. It's lovingly rendered, of course. It's this man's wife. And for Woman Carding Wool, she's actively engaged in her work. It's almost like we're flies on the wall in this pairing, looking at these women while they are not looking at us. So for the next pairing, we're going to be looking at child rearing. So in this pairing, which is also next to each other in the gallery, we have Cornelia Field Mari's The Little Sister from 1895, which is a pastel and graphite from the St. Louis Art Museum. And we have Studio Portrait of a Nurse and Child, circa 1900 to 1915, which is a black and white photograph from the Missouri Historical Society. So child rearing as a labor, that's a labor that is socially prescribed to women, And it's a labor that can happen within a familial unit, but also with outside parties to the familial unit. So in Mari's picture of the little sister, we have a familial unit here, as determined by the title, the little sister. This is a young woman who could easily be categorized as a child herself, who was involved in the act of child care within her family. So thinking about young women's education, how are young women educated in labor? For labor that happens in the household, that is going to happen within the household, that education. So you can see that this young woman, she knows how to hold this baby. She knows how to take care of this baby. This is a common part of her life, that childcare aspect. Often though, in this time period, young women, especially of the working class, they would be taken away from their outside education in order to contribute to the household in this way through childcare. In the other image, we have a portrait of a Black nurse and a white child. So this is an image that is post-emancipation. It's 1900 to 1915, but it is coming from the tradition of enslaved nurse portraiture, which I want to discuss a little bit more today. So enslaved nurse portraiture was a mode of portraiture very common in the antebellum South. So you have the enslaved nurse, who would be the primary caretaker for the baby, was pictured with the baby. And why was this happening? So first of all, it's a practical matter. If the photographs take a long time to produce, you want the baby sitting with someone who the baby is comfortable with, so that would be a primary caretaker. It was also a matter of anti-abolition arguments, thinking about displaying the close relationship between the baby and the nurse as a way to argue you wouldn't want to break up this bond. Clearly, they have such a close bond, look at the photo. Whereas in reality, this type of labor was not good for the woman, to say the least. It was often very emotionally and physically damaging to them, and often took them away from the care of their own children. However, in this time period, 1900 and 1915, we have many contemporary authors who are lamenting the loss of this labor arrangement, of this connection between the nurse and child. But as we can see in this image, that modality of labor of a Black nurse and a white child, it is continuing, and the visual modes of representation, the ways in which we are visually understanding this labor, are continuing as well. So on to equity. That's Hannah, correct?
Hi, everyone. So our next section is titled Equity. And within this section, the chosen works of art investigate the systemic mistreatment and misrepresentation of women who participate in male-dominated fields of work or try to participate in these fields. Within this section, we see a push against the status quo through a demand for equitable treatment in areas such as education, wartime manufacturing, and the art world. One area where the status quo was challenged within this section is in the area of women's education and work within the humanities field. So some of the first works that we actually added into this exhibition when we were writing our proposal were these two caricatures. These two caricatures are by French artists Henri Dumier and Edouard de Beaumont, who both created these images to mock the Les Bas Bleus movement. So the Les Bas Bleus movement, which also translates to the blue stocking movement in English, it was a movement popular in upper middle class French and British society, where women challenged the gender-limited education system by hosting intellectual salons and participated in humanist work such as writing and art. The women in the Les Bas Bleus movement utilized feminist literature such as Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Women and Olympia de Gouges' Declaration for the Rights of Women, both written in the 1790s, which were inspired by previous Enlightenment era literature. These images in mostly male-read magazines denigrated the Les Bas Bleus movement by depicting women neglecting their expected household duties, trading them in instead for humanist studies and education. Both Dumier and Beaumont were known for social commentary and satirical images in magazines such as Faribault and La Charivari. And in Dumier's caricature, we see the woman flings a pair of pants at her husband because she refuses to sew a button because she is focusing instead on her humanist studies. In Beaumont, we see two distracted women writing a book, ironically on the topic of motherhood, while their baby drowns in a bucket of water behind. Similar images to Beaumont's caricature became the most popular sort of imagery, ridiculing the Labob blue because of the depiction of a drowning baby in the background. And this became like something that was used by a lot of other caricature artists like during this time. So Beaumont's was a popular image that would be seen in these satirical magazines. And it not only pokes fun at the Labob blue movement, but it also gives it a sinister undercurrent. These caricatures were widely read in these magazines and denigrated the status of women in education and humanist studies, and also attempted to ensure the patriarchal status quo in upper middle class households. One reason why these images degraded the Labob blue movement was because of censorship within France during the July monarchy, when the restored Bourbon King Louis Philippe attempted to quell any amount of public ridicule against his rule in the turbulent post-revolution period by not allowing any images or commentary about himself to be published in satirical magazines such as these. Dumier actually had previously been arrested for a caricature ridiculing the king before he created this piece that we see on the screen here. And these works are some of the earliest dated works that we have in our exhibition. And now when we transition to Alice's section, we're going to discuss some more modern works within the equity section, which deal with questions of equity in the art world and the historical canon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hannah. Yeah, so this work is also part of the equity section, dealing with structural inequities that women who are working face. In this case, we have the Sunflower Pulsing Bee at Arles 1996 by Faith Ringgold, and it's a lithograph. In this case, what we see is a group of 9 African-American women, 9 heroines of African-American history, whose names are also imprinted on the quilt as a mode of like honoring their achievement. What we have here is, names like Rosa Parks, Ella Baker, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, all canonical kind of iconic women. And then we have the 9th woman, the 9th figure, who is on the bottom left corner, whose name is Willia Marie Simone, who is actually Ringgold's kind of alter ego. He's like a fictional persona who is here holding up this quilt as a way to honor the achievement of these women, these pillars of Black excellence. What we also see here is the figure of the painter Van Gogh on the right side, kind of to the side, whereas the Black woman occupies center stage. And so already we see this dynamic between centering one group and marginalizing another, but in reality, it's usually the Black women who are marginalized. And so what we see here is a critique of the historical as well as the art historical canon. We have these women with outstanding seminal achievement who's often either erased or undervalued in mainstream narratives of history. And what's more is that we see the subject here, the sunflowers, and the location is Arles, which is a place in France where Van Gogh used to stay. It's his temporary home where he painted this series of now famous sunflower paintings. And so this gesture that Ringgold is doing of taking this canonical subject by a canonical white male painter and populating it with Black women and Black achievement. And that gesture itself is a gesture of resistance. And what's more, here we see quilting, and quilting is a very pointed subject because it's an art form that's historically undertaken by African-American women, especially Black enslaved women. And so depicting it in this way is a way of honoring not only Black art, but also Black labor, and with the inclusion of this pantheon of female figures, Black excellence and leadership as well. And thinking about craft, thinking about medium, I mean, quilting is an art form that's undervalued with this hierarchy of art form in especially Western art historical canon, where oil paintings and sculptures are more highly valued, whereas forms like textiles, as Lydia said before, and quilting are kind of more on the lower side. And so this work, to tie it to equity, it's about this processes of exclusion and marginalization that's in canon formation. And the next section that we have here is performance, which is our third and final section. So the idea of performance that we are grappling with here is twofold. The first level is the idea of gender as performance, which obviously draws from the theories of Judith Butler, a very seminal feminist figure. The idea that, say, femininity is a kind of compilation of acts. It's, you know, your mannerisms, behaviors, your dress, everything that you that constitute femininity, and it's not innate or biological in that sense. And so this section, we examine those depictions of women kind of performing their sexuality, whether it's intentional or not. And then the second meaning of performance that we're dealing with here is the idea of performance as resistance, which is seen in the feminist art of the 1970s that's associated with second wave feminism, especially like video art and performance art. In our exhibition, we have works by Eleanor Antin and Martha Rossler, which we'll talk about in a minute, that actively react to and undermine the standards of femininity and gender roles and gender expectations.
So one example of work depicting a performance of femininity is in Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec's famous lithographic poster of Jane Avril au Jardin de Paris. Jean-Louis Baudin, who later became known by her famous stage name Jane Avril, was one of the most famous cabaret dancers in Paris in the late 19th century due to her performances in dance halls such as the Moulin Rouge. Jane Avril herself actually commissioned Toulouse-Lautrec, who was a close acquaintance of hers, to create this widely published and popularly displayed poster of her in the midst of a suggestive can-can kick to advertise their upcoming show. This is indicative of the varying degrees of power that famous women performers such as Jane Avril held over their public image in the French media during this period of time. It is also important to note that the status of female entertainers varied in France during this period because these performances were often viewed to be sometimes unacceptable and immoral performance of women's sexual agency. But at the same time, the Parisian entertainment sector, especially regarding nightlife entertainment, was on the rise due to urbanization and the separation of business and pleasure in everyday lives of middle-class Parisians. It's also interesting to note that Toulouse-Lautrec places the viewer in the perspective of watching Jane Avril's performance in the orchestra box. So the viewer is actually part of the crowd watching the show and thus becomes an active participant within the image itself. Also, next we'll have Alice presenting on performance art with Martha Rossler's piece next.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. So what we have here is Martha Rossler video, Semiotics of the Kitchen, 1975. So as I said, it's a video and it's featuring Rossler herself as the female subject that you see here. This work is considered one of the most seminal works of feminist art, coming from second wave feminism, which arose, as many of you probably know, in the 60s and 70s. In this case, Rossler is referencing a very prominent cultural phenomenon, which is the rise of just cooking show TV hosts. And here she's parodying that image of the woman in the kitchen. And in this case, so in the video, Rossler operates various kitchen tools and spelling the alphabet at the same time. So it starts with apron and then bowl and then chopper. So A, B, C, and so on. And hence the title Semiotics. But the way that she operates these tools is not very conventional. It's not, you know, she doesn't actually cook anything. And the edifice of this whole thing is very clear. And it's not a real kitchen. It's actually a set. And there's no real food being made. It's just her operating these tools. And in a very jarring way. So if you watch a video, you see that she's like stabbing the air with her knives. She's like very violently jamming things onto the table, slinging tools back and forth. Gestures that suggest frustration and anger, rather than the like happy, very heartwarming figure of domesticity that people often associate with cooking shows. Moreover, I mean, she's dressed in this like really plain way that de-emphasizes her sexuality, literally, that rather than emphasizing it the way that a lot of illustrations and TV shows often do. And so in this work, she's responding specifically to the cultural norms at that time in the 1950s and 60s, the rise of very performative, not very normative sexual norms. In this case, we see this image. This is an illustration from a magazine, Good Housekeeping, which was a very popular women's magazine at that time. And we see a woman like posing with this broom, like being really attractive, really. And we see on the right side, her husband returns and she's kind of posing in this like seductive way. And the title, of course, is I Can Hardly Wait. So in this case, Rossler's performance stands in stark contrast to that, and it's definitely in dialogue with this kind of depiction. And of course, coming back to the idea of performance, she's performing these roles in order to undermine them, as seen in this comparison. Yeah, and I think that's the last works that we want to talk about in depth.
So before we begin the Q&A session, we would also like to give our thanks to some wonderful people who have helped make this whole exhibition process possible. Lydia, Alice, and I would first like to extend our thanks to James Cohen for his generosity, which has made the Greenberg Fellowship possible. And we would also like to thank Meredith Malone and Professor Sheeran, our advisors, whose advice and expertise has been invaluable and so helpful throughout this whole experience. And we'd also like to thank Kim Broker and Jane for their help throughout the exhibition, the brochure making process. Alice, Lydia, and I would also like to thank the Mildred Lane Kemper Art Museum and the Washington University Art History Department for their continued amazing support. So thank you. And thank you to everyone who is here today too.
Wonderful, all three of you. I love hearing your enthusiasm and your walk through the show. I think you chose works that really highlight the range and the depth that you're able to get into with this exhibition. So excellent, excellent work, all of you. Just another round of applause. I noticed we're going to start getting questions in the Q&A. Please, everyone attending, please put your questions in the Q&A. That's going to be the best way to get them to our panelists, and I will moderate that and make sure. Yes, so as they're populating, I do have one that I would like to open with, and I'm really curious actually to know the answer. I don't know the answer ahead of time, so. I would love if all three of you, each of you would take just a moment to answer what's sort of the main thing you've learned, or one really interesting thing that you've learned during this exhibition process. And I'll leave it open like that.
I think for me, like the main thing I learned was mostly just about what the curatorial process in general is like. I've worked in museum education and like public programming before. And so with that, you don't usually get the hands-on experience of working necessarily with what objects actually go on display. You work with what's already on display and like available to you. So it was really interesting to be able to place objects in conversation with each other. And like you'll see that if you visit like the gallery itself, where we take a lot of works of art from like maybe the 1800s, but put it in conversation with something from like the 2000s. And I think it's interesting being able to actually find ways to set up and create those like nuanced conversations through the curatorial process.
Yeah, for me, I think the subject matter really comes to life to me as I do the research and as I do the exhibition. Um, we wrote in our brochure or our essay that women have been working for so long, it's since forever, but the work is often unacknowledged and unseen. And that like the histories of women's work is often marginalized and is often not acknowledged enough, and all these like not only like physical labor but emotional labor that we do, it's a lot of that is kind of lost somehow. And when we do the research, I was really struck by the fact that like most of our mediums are print and drawings, like doesn't have the same grandeur and kind of glamorous, doesn't have the same, it's not in the limelight the way that oil paintings and sculptures are that like I study in my art history courses. So it's really rewarding for me to dive into that history and to pull out these threads, and to show them to people and to say, we have to do this work and it's important and rewarding.
Well, I agree with both Alice and Hannah, but I'd also say for me personally, I learned just how fun collaborative work can be. I'm not someone who group work can sometimes feel like a bit of a hassle with coordinating schedules, especially online and that kind of stuff. But I just really was surprised at how much I just enjoyed every moment of collaborating with Hannah and Alice, and doing that collaborative writing, which can sometimes seem really difficult, was just such a joy developing those ideas together. And also having the mentorship, that was a lot more, I knew it was going to be meaningful, but it was really very meaningful to me in the entire process.
Great, these are really thoughtful answers. Well, I want to get into the Q&A. There's a lot of wonderful questions that are being dropped in there. So we'll start, I'm just kind of going as they come in for now. So one of the attendees is asking, were there works that you wanted to include in the exhibition? And I'm going to assume that that means that you couldn't, but I'd like that there's another part to that question. Go for it.
Yeah, I think I remember one work that we wanted to include was a work by Elizabeth Catlett that was up on Slam. We just couldn't get it because logistics and stuff, but that was a depiction of a Black woman doing labor on the field. And it was a very humanizing, very just deeply illuminating work that we just didn't get to highlight. And then we have one, actually before we get this one work by Ringgold, the Sunflower Quilting Bee, we were looking at another one of her work. I think it's called Joe Baker's Birthday. Not exactly sure, but that was also a work by Ringgold that depicts this Black female nude reclining on a bed, and then a white servant on the side, which is a reversal of the typical reclining female nude that you see, specifically Manet's Olympia and others, Venus, right, Titian, the Titian one. But yeah, it's very, so that was an opportunity for us to highlight that dynamic, and it's just like Black labor that's been, that's not been acknowledged. But yeah, those are the two I remember. I don't know about you two.
Yeah, there was a period of time early on before we refined the countries we were looking at, which was UK, US, and France, that we wanted to include some Mexican art. I'm very interested in Mexican modernism, so there was a specific Diego Rivera at Slam that depicted an Indigenous woman grinding maize, and I thought that would be a great addition to the conversation, but we decided to be more specific, more focused with our time periods and the countries we were drawing from, which I think benefited the exhibition overall. But I miss those pieces a little bit.
Yeah, I guess sorry, Hannah, I just want to highlight, I guess, to what Lydia is saying, that like there are a lot of works that we like wanted to include because, there's a lot of women's labor out there. But in the interest of analyzing each one in context and providing that depth to each of the work, it can't be a comprehensive survey of everything. So we were kind of selective in the final process, of course.
Yeah, and like I think another early piece that we ended up not including for similar, like keeping our focus on those three countries, there was a a photograph of a woman working in a Russian munitions factory during the Russian Revolution. And like that piece also had some like logistical things too, where we also knew we wanted to include an image of a woman doing wartime work. But so instead we ended up getting a piece from a museum closer to home, so the Missouri History Museum, and we have like a World War I poster that talks about the same themes that the photograph that we were looking at beforehand also exhibited.
Absolutely. Yeah, it would have been a very different exhibition. I think of all the different iterations this went through, but I do love the final product. I want to combine a couple of the questions because I think they go nicely together. So one attendee asks how you decided on the theme for your exhibition, and did you choose the theme first, or did you know that you wanted to work with, as the three of you first? And then and then a related question was, what was the process in finding the works of art for this exhibition? So really the conception of it all, how did it come together?
It's kind of a funny story. We met each other first. I ran into Hannah the last day of classes, fall 2019, in Whispers, I think, completely randomly. We went, oh, you're an art history major. I'm an art history major. Do you want to do the Greenberg together? We had never met before. So we decided we were going to apply for this together. And then Alice had just declared art history, and I know Alice previously, so I asked her to join as well. And then once we were a group together, we're all, such feminists, so we really wanted to do something to do with women in art history. It sort of came from that.
Yeah, as to the process, I think I joined when you guys already decided on women's work, and the idea was very broad at that time. There were no like specificity; it's just women's work as a kind of vague umbrella. So I think we started with the Le Bleu and some others depictions, the mod sewing, some of the like housework. Handiwork was one of the first ones that we chose, and the Rossler was one of the first like feminist work that we chose. And then the rest, I think, came from research in the summer. I think it was 2020, right, when we like researched everything online. And I had this struggle that I think I asked Meredith about, that like, does the selection of the work come first or the research come first? So that was just I guess it turns out to just be a simultaneous thing that summer.
Yeah, and then that summer we also started like putting together the conversations that we wanted these works of art to have with each other. And that's when we figured out like the sections of agency, equity, and performance at that period of time too, so that we could like place works of art specifically with each other.
Yeah, having witnessed a lot of this firsthand, I have to say it was a really interesting and very organic process. I thought the three of you worked beautifully together, and it's always surprising to me to hear that you didn't even know each other that well beforehand.
I just wanted to say, yeah, you learned quickly how to be nimble curators. How to have plan A and plan B and plan C and plan D. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Things sometimes go to plan D, especially in a pandemic. Yeah, so there's another a really interesting question in the chat. We have a question about, do you think women are now more understood by men and more personally understood? And this is your opinion. I mean, you don't have to, yeah, you're not speaking on behalf of all.
It's a loaded question. Well, I would say a lot of the pieces, especially the earlier pieces where we have men depicting women, they're often sympathetically, lovingly, affectionately, but they're not necessarily being made with the woman's point of view in mind. Whereas feminist theory and the basic ideas of feminism are just a little more widespread at this point and a little more mainstream. So I don't know. I don't know a lot of contemporary, I'm not a contemporary art historian at all. So I don't know a lot of contemporary male artists to compare to, but I would imagine artistic production of depicting women is probably being made with more of a woman's perspective in mind. But I don't know. What do you two think?
This is kind of a funny story, I guess. In the process of making this, one time we were trying to write the conclusion, and Hannah and Lydia launched into this 3-page essay about what has changed about women's work and what hasn't changed. And both are very populated, both columns. But then obviously it didn't make the fit in the end because it's kind of off topic, a lot of it. But yeah, it's a question that we thought about a lot, comparing what progress we've made over time. I like to think personally that as women gain more voice in society, like we've been writing, singing, making art, as we have that presence, and we speak our minds, and we tell our stories more, men will hopefully listen. And I guess some men have listened, and some but I guess I can't give a yes or no, I guess, but I'm hopeful and optimistic.
I agree with Alice. I also am hopeful and optimistic. And part of I think the purpose of this exhibition is to make sure that this conversation is something that is continued, and that women's work and women in society, all of those issues and things are talked about more, and just stay in the conversation. So we hope that this exhibition also helps with that too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is one of those things we've talked about a lot in our conversations about the more things change, the more they stay the same. And especially coming up, with the impact of the pandemic on women and female identifying people, and just, the stark differences that have been, I think, just, shed light on in new and interesting ways. So we have another question, which I love, actually. This is an excellent question. What is the role of humor in some of this work? And I'm definitely picking up on the Guerrilla Girls here and the Linka Clayton, but I mean, I do think that there's humor in a lot of it, in particular when you speak about dealing with emotional labor.
Yeah, I guess I can take that as it relates to, as you said, other Guerrilla Girls and even the Rossler. I mean, I think Rossler said in an interview that she wants people to laugh at her video. I mean, it's a serious work, but at the same time, it's very interesting. It's very funny to watch her just getting at, hitting these instruments for no reason. And I think the humor here is usually mixed with critique. And with the Guerrilla Girls, it's humor used in a way to direct attention at important issues, humor to grab people's attention. And if we see their work of art, which is called The Advantages of Being a Woman Artist, and they list out the advantages, but they're not really advantages. Things like the benefit of only being famous after you die. It's those things that are not funny, but they're kind of funny. So I guess using humor strategically to make a point, is it something that is a technique or a strategy that's used a lot in some of the feminist art? I'm not sure how to answer the emotional labor part. I guess we as women, emotional labor partly is to make people around us happy, and that for some of us who are funny, we use humor, not so much me. But I guess even though we do so lightheartedly, or kind of we don't talk about it a lot, but it's still labor, and it still takes up emotional space.
I was thinking, as you were talking about the Les Bas Bleus caricatures and the use of humor, because of course, we have the more second wave feminist aligned pieces that are using humor pointedly to focus on women's issues, but we also have pieces where women are the butt of the joke. So those different modalities of humor and at whose expense is the humor, it's interesting to think about in these pieces for sure.
All right, let's see. We have a lot of very thoughtful questions. So I'm going to jump around because I would actually like to know your favorite artworks of the exhibition. I see a question there. And so yeah, each of you quickly, what's your favorite artwork and why?
I can go first. I know off the bat, it's A Harlot's Progress by Hogarth. We didn't talk about that in the presentation. I we were doing a lot of modern art for this exhibition because of the collections we're drawing from. I am very much more at home in the early modern, and that's as early as we could push it. And I love A Harlot's Progress so much. I love the narrative aspects of it. I think every piece in the exhibition tells a story, but this piece is specifically a narrative about women's labor. And it's so, first of all, beautifully rendered, but also really enlightening about how people are thinking about this mode of labor.
I think my favorite works, I don't know, there's a tie. There's the Labor Blue caricatures. I really enjoyed researching those. But also the lithograph of the World War I poster that we included. It wasn't in this talk, but it's called For Every Fighter, a Woman Worker, and it's from the Missouri History Museum collection. And I've always been really interested in like wartime propaganda and like publications during those periods of time. So this one has just been of interest to me, and I really am excited that we got to include it within this exhibition.
It's really hard for me to. I was flipping through the brochures, like looking at different works to like choose which one I like the most. I think for me, it's like between the Rossler, which I've talked about a lot I've written essays and I've researched, and it's just so conceptually rich. And an aspect that I didn't talk about for that one is the semiotics of it, the way that she uses language and like kind of by tracing or spelling through, or going through the alphabet, she's kind of gesturing at it like a completely new language or a way of being, a way of speaking that's woman-centered or feminist, and I really love that aspect of the work as well. I am also drawn to, I'm going to choose two because why not? I'm also drawn to actually the Guerrilla Girls Advantages of Being a Woman Artist, just because for me, it's such a powerful piece because it commands your attention. And it's words, everyone understands language. And if you look at it, you see the message written here. And it's in these like bold black letters that kind of emulate like, advertising. It grabs your attention with this time for a just cause. So I really love that one as well.
Great answers. It's hard to pick just one. I think that those, you're put on the spot, but good job, all of you. Another question, there's a multi-part question, but I'm going to just ask the last part of it. They've asked which or how many of you are thinking of curatorial careers now due to this, or something in the museum field even?
I certainly am. I had a mind towards that before. I knew I wanted to do something in museum world, and this process has really solidified for me how much I just enjoyed the research and writing process of the catalog and putting the pieces together. So that, that's the track right now that I'm on.
Yeah, so I'm also planning on either going into like the curatorial world or possibly museum education. Whichever one seems to be the right fit after grad school. I'm attending a program at Syracuse in the fall after graduation to study Italian Renaissance art, which I'm really, really excited about. But yeah, definitely wanting to go into museum work after this, and this whole process has been so helpful and informative, and like helping me to choose a future career and what I want to do with my future.
I'm actually split between art and literature. That's my forever dilemma. I'm also an English major. I'm actually hoping to go into journalism and magazine writing. So I hope to write about art. and maybe art criticism, who knows. I feel like I'm not educated enough to do that, but but that's more so the direction that I'm thinking about, although this has been a tremendously rewarding, very amazing experience, but I'm split.
That's perfectly acceptable. Yes, you're all very young still, and you have a lot ahead of you. So I'm going to combine two questions again, because I think they're related. So we have a question about, in what ways did the pandemic affect your plan for the show, and how did you adapt? And then how long did it take to put this together, and how often were you communicating with each other? Because I think, yeah, you can't answer one of those without the other. So yeah.
Yeah, so we started, as Lydia said, I think fall of 2019, of like putting things together, and I think we pitched the exhibition sometime fall. Yeah, right. That fall.
In February of 2020.
I don't know time anymore. And then after that, we've been working on it pretty much ever since, especially starting from that summer of 2020, which is also when the pandemic started. So I think originally we were gonna research together in St. Louis, I think, with our internship at the Kemper, but because of COVID, we all kind of did our online research independently. And in that summer, we, I think we call Meredith and Isla, I think Kim, I forgot, but yeah, like we call the team every week or every other week to update our research progress. And we were reading a lot that summer. And then this past fall, we wrote our brochure essay with Professor Sharon. And that went on for the whole semester because we had a lot of refining to do, a lot of writing, polishing afterwards. So that was for me really when like our ideas kind of coalesce and like, come together. And then, yeah, the spring is when kind of we put the final touches to the brochure with the help of Jane and Hart, the copy editor at Kemper. And yeah, we're here now. It's quite long. It's a long process.
We were also communicating a lot with each other outside of our formal meetings. We have a group chat. We were constantly on Zoom writing together very late, but it was all very fun.
I just wanted to add, and maybe not to step on your toes, Isla, but to ask, there was another question about how you came up, asking how you came up with these three themes. I wonder if you wanted, while you're talking about the writing, if you wanted to say a little bit about that. And I also just wanted to say, it's crazy that I only met you all in person about like a week or two ago when we actually installed the exhibition. So.
Yeah, the three themes actually, so it came from, I originally, I was brainstorming for something, and then I wrote down these three words, agency, equity, and identity, which is what the original title of that section is. And it was just a way for me to formulate questions and think about some of the works. And then at that time, we were doing chronological order. So we're kind of going through things, just not organizing in this way, but then we found that it didn't work because of time gaps in between the works. So we switched to thematic, and then we're just like, what themes are there? And then I kind of pitched these three words, and it kind of worked, except for the last one, and we had to change that one. But yeah, I guess for me, when I was formulating questions, the three are kind of the things that keep coming up. Like it's the things that, the angles that keep kind of coming up for different works. And I just kind of saw that as the common thread.
We were brainstorming about the second wave feminist works in particular, and you said, oh, it's really about agency and equity and identity. And Hannah said, wait, isn't that the whole thing? So we decided, because these conversations do really just continue. They're stemming from a much longer conversation, and they do continue. I see a through line throughout the pieces. So we determined the sections first, and then we figured out how the pieces fit in. And many pieces did musical chairs for a while, where they were going to be placed. But yeah, thanks Alice for that one. It was inspired.
Yeah, like having the three sections helped us also a lot with choosing which pieces to actually include within the exhibition. So there were some pieces that we decided to take out, and then some pieces that we decided to add in because we felt like they fit better with the conversations that we were having within each of these sections. So having these 3 sections was really helpful with the whole process of like forming the exhibition.
Yeah, and as someone who witnessed the copious name changes of that final section, I think you 3 really you've hit it on the head, and it's also a testament to how well organized these works are, that they can fit so well in each of these sections, right? Nothing seems totally out of place, or nothing, there's no outliers. So yeah, there's a lot of great questions. I'm also really curious what the answer to this next one. So we have a question about, according to your working experience this time, what would you do differently if you have another curatorial project in the future? And obviously you wouldn't have a pandemic, but well, hopefully, but what, beyond that.
I think I definitely limit the scope in terms of how many centuries or what continents I'm most invested in, because this one is a lot of work to research in terms of context, and because we don't want to evaluate these works or not analyze these works out of their context, right? So it takes a lot to do all of this. So maybe next time I'll be less ambitious.
I was going to say I'd broaden the scope, so I don't know where we stand on that. I think we did, we addressed intersectionality quite a bit. If perhaps it was like a longer term project or we had a little bit more room, I do wish there was a little bit more intersectional identities we could bring into the conversation that I think would be really fruitful part of it.
Yeah, I agree with what Lydia was talking about, because there's like so many stories and like aspects that we could bring in, but there's only also like so much room on the wall. So, but yeah, exactly what Lydia said is probably what I would also be thinking.
I mean, I think this question of the scope of the exhibition, it's kind of great. It's like one of you would go less, one of you would go way more. But that does bring up a question that's in the Q&A about how you settled on the scope, which I know you touched on a bit when you were talking about kind of how this came to be. But any other thoughts or any other points on that?
Well, a lot of it just came from the pieces that were, so of course we're starting from pieces in the Kemper's collection. So a lot of it was just coming from those works that were most readily available to us and that we're placing in this conversation. We're just organically coming from these contexts that we ended up focusing on. So part of it was just an organic matter of what we had access to, what was fitting in best with the work we're already doing.
Yeah, and we don't have much time left, but I figured maybe we'll end on a personal note. And there's a lovely question here. Just how do you think your personal experiences influenced this work?
I mean, I'm not sure how it influences this work, but I'm a workaholic for sure. Like, especially these days, I work all hours, all days. So I guess it's a personal topic for me, to investigate like what women's labor has meant for women's experiences and what it means to be a woman working, and whether that's different from other people working. So I guess it's a question that I'm curious to myself. I'm not sure if I have the answer, but even after all of this, but it's just definitely been rewarding, the journey.
For me, like one of my main areas of research that I've been really interested in is women artists. Usually I look at it more through like during the Renaissance period of time. So it was really interesting for me to be able to study more contemporary and modern women artists who've really made a big difference in the art historical canon. And so I think that's really like influenced how I'm doing research on Renaissance women artists too. So yeah.
I guess for me, I identify as a feminist. I've been for a long time, but I've been throughout this process on a little bit of an ideological journey as we're reading all these different, feminist scholars throughout these time periods of where do my personal experiences fit within this? Where do my personal values align with them? Especially in this exhibition where we're talking about a lot of perspectives that are often left out of the mainstream narratives of feminism. So I think that's not exactly how my personal experience has affected the exhibition, but more how the exhibition has affected my personal experiences the other way. But it's definitely affected many of the ways I think about feminism and feminist scholarship.
Wonderful. I love that answer, Lydia. It's a reciprocal process, right? Well, I think that is all the time we have. I know there's still more questions in the chat, but it's a little after 6 and we don't want to keep you all from your evening activities. So again, everyone just join me in congratulating these, these
Yeah, congratulations. A wonderful job tonight and a terrific exhibition, which again will be up until August 1st.